So, if everything is perfect and everything remains to be perfected for human life, everything is perfect, but everything has to become perfected for human life. Where's the problem? Why is there so much suffering? Why is there so much misery? Hi, this is Michael Shevack. On a happy note, with all that misery, welcome to God's Search. This is podcast number, I think it's 36. We're getting there. And I want to continue the discussion that we had last week. We discussed, and this is a continuous theme in the overarching story of covenant, okay? And we are talking about the religious methodology and the religious experience that is not built into religion, but is part of everyday, ordinary, what can be called secular life. And we talked about how basically reality is perfect, it's perfectly ordered, everything comes into existence at the correct timings. It is a timing beyond our mind, but includes our inputs, so it's a cooperative process. Not exactly equal. There are forces that are larger than us, but we have our opportunity to have our play, to create our world, our society, our civilization, and assert the delicious gift. I call it not the original sin. I don't like that expression, but I call it the original gift of free will, of selfishness, the ability to do for ourselves alone and not consider anyone else but ourselves. And we have also talked about how within that perfection, which New Age people like to call manifestation, it's a nice term, we have the abilities to discern what actions are harmonious with life, what actions create enhanced goodness, what actions create a perfection, which is adding to the perfection that already exists, and what diminishes the goodness we experience. This is how we have what we're here on God Search to do, which is to have an experience called God. Now, why does why do things go wrong? We've touched upon this earlier, but we're going to do it again in a slightly different way to impress upon you the importance of this discussion because this issue is the core issue we are dealing with in the United States of America, particularly when we are dealing with the blue team and the red team. As I told you, I call it the blue team and the red team because it reminds me of day camp with color war, which I always thought was the stupidest thing I had ever been forced by my parents to participate in. Competing colors was just absolutely driving me insane. I didn't understand it, but they wanted to mainstream me, so I mainstreamed. So the core issue we're dealing with is two kinds of spirituality. Two kinds. The first kind of spirituality, which we've discussed, is a kind of American natural law. Natural law being a phrase that originated with the Greeks and it was passed down through Thomas Aquinas and then from Aquinas to the enlightened philosophers and the enlightened philosophers to America. And it also, in recent decades, it's taken on a different flavor as it draws on the American transcendentalist tradition, with largely New England, Thoreau, Emerson, Whitman, which is very Eastern and Indian inspired, which was very, very popular in the 19th century, and which everyone worked through during World War II, while Hitler was resurrecting all of these Vedic symbols, and it's very complex. Don't go there without a guide. The woods can be very dangerous. But we are talking about how we sow and reap our own desires and our thinking. We sow and reap our own creativity, and this is all marvelous. And this is an American point of view. You have rights endowed by the creator to be creative, and you're part of a free enterprise system with no one's boot on your neck, and you can just live and love and grow and think and create. And you're part of what the Constitution calls a nation, okay? A nation. But it's not truly a nation. It's the beginning of a nation. It's a state, which is a political construct. It has a constitution, an astonishing document called the American Constitution. And it is the oldest living continuous democratic constitution in the world from one of the youngest nations. It bears repeating. But the statehood of the United States was designed in a particular way to take the burden off of us from an earlier stage of the development of natural law, which had deeper roots within Catholicism, particularly Thomas Aquinas, which led to a kind of divine right of government, a divine right of kingship, a kind of messianic structure. And that reached its zenith, in England after Henry VIII, when the church and the monarchy fused into a single institution. And that had good sides in terms of creating a messianic structure that flooded the world with the British view of unity. And that had good sides, and it had bad sides. Excessive authoritarianism. And that was passed into America, where we stopped that kind of excess authoritarianism and we reconfigured the natural law philosophy so that the individual became sacred, government became secondary, religion became secondary. And in that process, you have wonderful things, incredible individual creativity, incredible economic energizing, never before seen on that scale in the history of human civilization. Never before. But now we are facing some of the difficulties of that philosophical view. There's nothing to be worried about. We are simply seeing the excess of that view. And we're dealing with it in the most dramatic ways. We're dealing with it through issues like abortion. We're dealing with it through issues of transgenderism. We're dealing with it through issues of, same-sex relations. We're dealing with it in all of the ways that the previous stage of natural law dealt with, but they dealt with it in an incredibly authoritarian, if not brutal, kind of crushing of divergency. We're dealing with those things again. So why do our manifestations go bad? I mean, if everything is perfect and it has to be perfected by human experience, and that's the thing that's important, why is it just simply not a problem? Well, the problem is that we don't manifest in a vacuum. There are aspects of life which are already formed. We require eyes, for example, to amplify the brain's intuiting of data and be able to see even more effectively than the brain can do. There are schools in Europe that are now teaching blind people to see using the mind, because the eye, which is embryologically just an extension of frontal tissue, is adapted to make it a better view, but it's not the source of vision. So we have eyes that can see things, and we depend on our eyes. We require ears. We require skin to touch, to sense. If you do not have the ability to sense pain, it can cause tremendous damage, because pain, however unpleasant, is a safeguard against damage. It protects us. It's built into our biology to pay attention to pain signals, because generally speaking, they are an indication that something is wrong. We also have a requirement It requires a male germ cell and a female germ cell, not necessarily in that order. So let's be fair all the way around. I do have a certain habit that's built into me, a female germ cell and a male germ cell to join in some fashion in order to create a human being. That can be supplemented with artificial technologies, but basically, you're not going to change that much until people can clone somatic cells or convert somatic cells, meaning cells that are non-reproductive, into reproductive cells. And then you can do all sorts of other things. But somehow you're going to have to fulfill that requirement of some version of male and some version of female in order to create new life. Obviously, as we discussed way back when we were talking about value priorities, you got to breathe air. Single most important thing in life, you got to breathe. Can't last more than a couple of seconds, a couple of minutes. You have to drink water, you have to have food, you have to have some modicum of shelter or clothing, depending on where you live. These are all requirements. Now, these requirements are so deeply embedded in who we are, whether they are handed to us by fiat, not the car in Italy, great car, by the way. I had one. By fiat, meaning an act of God, an action by God, right? A doing, you know, or they're part of evolution, so it's a continuous action that produces it. Either one of those explanations is irrelevant to the discussion. The issue is there are pre-formations that are there in our body, on the earth, and beyond the earth that we have to consider when we act. So if we act in a way that is for our selfish good, and which we're entitled to, it's a wonderful gift. The original gift is wonderful. No need to squash it. No need to squash that kind of creativity and that individuality and correct entrepreneurial behavior. No reason to squash it. But if we use that in a way that is exclusively designed for what we personally want, such exclusively for profit, without consideration of other things, then we can have destruction. We can use our creativity, create what we want, but in a way that hurts us. We don't think about it. If we cut down a tree in order to build our house, do we realize that we may be depriving some squirrels or some birds of homes? That's a very minor thing. And of course, the damage is a little. The squirrels can vacate if you don't, burn the tree, and the birds can fly off if you don't hurt their little wings, and they can find homes elsewhere. The same thing that happens to us if we decide to, use a neutron bomb on the Earth, and we'd have to go to Mars. We are natural creatures. We are not just supernatural creatures. So there are preformations that are part of human life that are critical. When you take the ability of the human being to create and imagine and just sow and reap their thinking and their ideas according to how they feel, because they have rights endowed by the Creator, all right? They don't say soul, they say rights endowed by the Creator. And you then do something which is very, very tricky. You say that my identity as a person is absolutely sacred because it is endowed by the Creator. Curiously, we create all sorts of contention around that, especially when people challenge their genital sex with their gender sex. And they say, my identity as a male is my identity. And my biology does not figure into it so that my identity has to be respected as if it is genital sex. I'm not debating this, whether it's right or wrong. I have a very, very complex opinion, and I'm not giving it to you here. I'm not giving it to you. It's too delicate, and we have to do it slowly. What I want to highlight is that issue, which is kind of the epitome of identity crisis, where the person's identity seems to violate the biology, which seems to be the design of God or evolution becomes a big issue, and that becomes the core of what's called identity politics. However, what is that blue team issue is the same issue on the red team, which is let's not squash individual identity, individual sense of self, individual entrepreneurship. Do you see? One issue is attacked for identity, and the other issue hides behind the mythology of excessive capitalism as the greatest good. I love capitalism. It's a marvelous system. I am not bashing it. Do not think for a second I am. I said excessive capitalism. Both issues, the individual unsaleable right to unlimited profit regarding what cost to yourself as a person and your community and this world that we're living in, and the issue of what is the boundary, if any, between individual identity and biology. These are the same issues. They are ecological, both ecological. They are both painful, painful. An individual who has an incongruity within themselves that they need to heal, where they need to discover the they that is part of their life and own the they that is part of the matrix of how they're designed. That causes pain in a world which favors, for natural reasons, the design of biology, which tends to be cisgender, not rigidly so. There's plasticity involved in it, but tends to for reproductive purposes. The same kind of pain, though they don't hide it, they tend to hide it, is the fear that the collectivism and the care about society and the regimentation that would take place through excessive legislature that controls the individual inspiration, the individual identity to seek their good. The thrust of capitalism, which is really the free enterprise system, they're not the same, that will be hurt and we will be damaged as a society. What I'm trying to bring to the forefront here is that what appear to be two completely different political philosophies are not, because both variations of human beings, blue people, red people, and there are plenty of people in between, both different kinds of people are, surprise, people. And they're dealing with the same thing. What are they dealing with? The fact that the kind of natural law we were raised with by the Enlightenment got displaced. And what happened is the Industrial Revolution took over, and our ability to sow and reap for the sake of profit became very detached from our bodies, very detached from the planet. And I do not need to go into a debate on global warming. I think it's tedious and dumb. Bottom line, if there is any human activity that would exaggerate the problem of global warming, whether it's caused by geology or not, but if there is any human activity that can be proven to cause more damage, we should refrain from it, right? The confusion is the debate on causality. Okay, that's nuts. So what happens is that the individual freedom to sow and reap and cause and effect, which we were talking about as the marvelous spiritual component that is behind the religious methodology that constitutes the normal, natural, spiritual process of being human, and the normal, natural, living, breathing, life driving force, life driving force that creates American freedom also creates the excesses that are identity driven. The identity of ourselves being capitalist or identity of ourselves being one gender or another. And there are incongruities with the body or the planet because, as I said earlier, we are not just sowing and reaping human desires in a vacuum. We are having to deal with already formed, already designed elements to who we are. I believe they took many, many, many millennia to accomplish. Others think it was handed by God in an act of Genesis. To me, that is an issue of time scale and is not an issue of religious view versus science view. But that's my particular view. So when we are sowing and reaping, whether you are taking the religious view, which is you have an original sin and you could break through the divine nature of all things, the eternal law, so that when you use your human law, you do not do it in a way that's consonant with creation. You violate divine laws, such as let your animals rest, the Sabbath, male and female getting together to reproduce. When you do these things that violate these laws, it causes great contention and rift in society. And what we have now is a war between two different variants of natural law. One which is more the result of the Enlightenment, and the other which is a return to a more biblically founded view of natural law, which probably reached its height during St. Thomas Aquinas. The tendency is to go back to the religious law and reassert the lines of male and female, the lines of plants and animals, the lines of individual freedom versus, material death, right? And these are all done, but it's all done selectively, right? It's all done selectively. So what happens is they ignore many of the moral foundation of our world, which we call ecological. At the same time, the identity issues have become heightened tremendously in dealing with the intergender movement, which is an extremely important movement for human self-awareness. Do not underestimate its importance. It is part of the design of this world. It is not a mistake. And what happens is we have to deal with, well, when does identity become too extreme? When does identity reach a limit where it could, if excessive, damage the structure to society? It doesn't mean it is a dangerous thing unto itself, nor is capitalism dangerous unto itself. What we discuss when we're dealing with modifying laws are really what could happen in extreme excess. Extreme excess. It is excess that we really have to handle when we're talking about evil. We have to talk about excess. It is the excess of our behaviors that, if they go out of control, can imbalance our world. It is the excess of things that are really good, as we talked about, breeding beautiful, red, delicious apples. Well, now they're like starchy potatoes because the sugar content is so high. We bred something which is artificially beautiful. It looks like Snow White's apple, but it's beginning to taste terrible. So anything that we do, which even if its intention is good, in excess will turn out to be destructive to the order of life in which we live. There is an order here. We do not manifest our desires. We do not sow and reap capitalism without considering the world we live in. And our identities, whether they're religious identities or sexual identities or political identities or individual philosophical identities, whether they're the clothing you choose, whether it is the eyeglasses you wear, whether it is your haircuts, whatever is an identity property that you have, when they are taken in excess, so they are violations of other people and communal requirements, it creates difficulties. Difficulties. So what we need to be concerned about is not this ridiculous war between red and blue. And it's being epitomized, really, what has taken place over the tragic death of Charlie Kirk. I don't agree with Charlie 100%. There are things about his thinking which I thought were luminous, and there are things about his thinking that I thought were very dangerous. I'm not an all or nothing guy. I like to listen very closely and see what is the truth that someone is so that I can learn more. And I like to see about their excesses so I can reflect upon myself for my own excesses. Because if I can see it in someone else, whoop, there it is. It's pointing back to me. But this is the kind of stuff that we're dealing with in the media. And frankly, it's being done so unintelligently with no discernment as to the true issues that are underneath that are causing the difficulties. So, in the process of experiencing the religious methodology, which is part of life, that we can sow and reap and see the consequences of our actions, it does not give us unlimited permission to experiment, unlimited permission to, hey, let's see what a nuclear power is. Let's destroy a country. There are other ways to develop nuclear power than annihilate two cities. There are other ways to test the power if we want to have that kind of power, which is a beautiful thing. You can use it, you know, and it has practical advantages. But there are other ways to test the power than through excess, which is the destruction of two massive cities in Japan. You see, I'm not saying that we don't sow and reap and that we don't experience the delight of manifestation. And we should do so with love. But the love requires a law. And here, as a Jew, I must tell you, I do have a little bit of problem with, untempered Christian theology that makes love and spirit everything and makes law unimportant. I also had the difficulty with untempered Hebrew view, which tends to push law, 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 and doesn't consider enough of the flexibility. Both are problematic in my point of view, but this is my view, and you should be always aware of your prejudices of your teachers. Do not take me as absolute or any kind of authority. I've never met God. As I said from day one, God is an extremely dangerous word, and I'm not going to represent God 100% because I can't. It's not in my toolkit. All right. Now, so in addition to sowing and reaping and expressing your identity and your creativity as a human being in all sorts of ways, which includes a certain gender flexibility that is a normal and natural part of creatures on the earth. Okay, they all have it. We have to be careful about excess. It is the excess and the potential for excess that we address with what is commonly called laws. They're there as placeholders and boundaries to be aware of what the excess is. The excess of abortion. I'm not anti-abortion. I'm not pro-abortion. I find both views completely incomplete. I just cannot think in those terms. But excessive abortion can be very damaging. Excessive suffering due to not permitting abortion can also be very damaging. So I'd like to recommend to everyone out there that we take a new viewpoint, which is a very delicate approach, is we don't look at right and wrong. We look at everything having value and meaning, everything having purposefulness in our ability to teach some aspect of good. And we identify instead what are the excesses that can interfere with the freedom and the wonderful self-expression that comes with being American, with having rights endowed by the Creator, that ensure a sacredness to our self-identities that governments and religions have no right to interfere with. Now, that has to be safeguarded. But at the same time, our individual identities must take into account some of the fixed boundaries that are part of human life, such as we need oxygen to breathe. Don't poison it. It's not very dumb. It's very dumb to not pay attention. If you're going to throw garbage into the air and you get sick, don't do it. There's a fixed boundary here. Your body is designed for it. I mentioned a couple of podcasts back, of course, we have creativity. Why not genetically re-engineer ourselves so we can breathe sulfur dioxide? Now we don't have a pollution problem. But should we do that? Oh, yeah, it's probably doable, but should we do that? Is there an actual sacredness, not just to our individual rights, but a sacredness to the actual order and world and how this world is designed? Are they both sacred? The order outside us in which we live and the order inside of us by which we gauge what appears to us on the outside as well as our own self and our physiology. Are they both sacred? It's unfortunate and fortunate, but it's unfortunate that the Constitution, in its rebellion from religion and its rebellion from extreme, political elitism in the form of a king, walked away from two of the components to life, which is proper morality and proper respect for creation. These are things that are largely, from my perspective, Roman. In the Hebrew Bible, what's commonly called the Old Testament, it's a different structure. And I'm very, very pleased that people are talking to each other and learning about each other's different religious viewpoints in order to heal the terrible rift that took place between Roman religion and the Hebrew people, which we're still playing out now in this incessant war between Israel and what's called Palestine. These are ongoing cycles and nightmares that are going on because we are not mastering our original gift of individual creativity, and we are confusing our individual identities with the absoluteness of God. Sacredness of individuality does not mean absoluteness of individuality. Let me say that again. We have a right to sacred individuality in the United States. It's precious and sacred. It cannot be coerced. But we confuse that with the absoluteness of supposedly the nature of God. And we are getting confused. Okay? We are getting confused. Our philosophies are sowing and reaping messes that we are living through materially. They are manifesting. We're creating problems, and we think the problem is the other person, when the problem is not the other person. It's our way of thinking and having learned religious thinking that is not correct. Having learned scientific thinking, which is applied outside proper boundaries. So all of a sudden, there are quantum philosophies that are distorting moral, sacred boundaries. There's all sorts of stuff. By the way, please, a lot of you, my social media guy is finally feeling better and he's back on the on the horse. So I'm reaching a lot of you guys now through Instagram and stuff, and some of you are responding through Instagram accounts. But I prefer really if you go to yourgodsearch.com and send me a note because that's the forum that I think is best for me to answer some of these questions. I'm dealing with these things kind of out there and kind of loosey-goosey and broad strokes. And you have to be able to own it and slow this conversation down so that you can take in the pieces for yourself in your own way, in harmony with your own spiritual path, and digest it. So that's the best forum. You can reach me 24/7 on that. And I'm happy to deepen my viewpoint with you. Also, correct it I'm a mere human being and I could be excessive in my viewpoint, thinking that it is the correct viewpoint. And I rely on conversation in order to make me better. Now, that's the point. We can sow and reap our individuality. That is one piece of the conversation. There is another thing, which are fixed relationships, fathers, mothers, children, you name it, and all variations that are variations of these fixed relationships. The individuality and the freedom of individuality and the necessity that is part of our design or evolution, which depends on whatever view you want. This merging of the left side and the right side together, our left brain, our right brain, our creativity, our structuring, our ability to structure, all of these things. This is ancient stuff. It's the Garden of Eden story. It's what happens when you take a bite of the result of creation's knowledge, which is its fruit, and you too can be an individual creator. So don't think for a second, even if you don't go to church or if you don't have a religion, that you are not playing out in the secular, everyday secular, the religious process. The religious process, including simple denominations of right and wrong, or one excess as opposed to another excess, the duality of that are on two sides of the mind crack that is our natural biological makeup. We have a corpus callosum in between the two hemispheres, and the knowledge crisscrosses, but it's not smooth. It's built, mind cracks are built into our body. We just have to learn how to override them and work with them. Don't be so certain that what you're experiencing is not the most basic core human spiritual experience, so basic, whoever the geniuses were that put together the Bible made sure it was at the first story, that there's creation, then there's human creation, and then there's a mind crack. Don't be so certain that in attempting freedom away from the bigotry of excessively domineering religion, which is the American heritage, that you haven't gone to the excessiveness of an individual kind of fascism, where the group is not adequately concerned and the integrity of the design of this world is not properly considered. Or you do it half. You're either pro-ecology and pro-individual behavior, even though it's anti-ecology, or you don't care about ecology, but you're pro-individual structures and orders and cisgenderism. We're all dealing with these mind cracks. Please, this is God search. The goal here is to experience God, experienced increased orders of good. That was the original natural law insight of the Greek philosophers that grew over time. And I'm bringing it back here so we don't forget where all of these ideas came from. You know, the good, the experience of the good is the legacy that every single human being and every nation should have in this world. That is the experience called God through our life on this lovely, humble human scale. I want you to enjoy it. It's difficult. Don't get lost in all of this crazy mayhem that the media is feeding you. Think clearly. If I die tonight, remember one thing. There is truth, and everything else is an opinion. There's truth, everything else is opinion. Some opinions are more complete than others, but no opinion is the truth unto itself. No opinion is the truth unto itself, including mine. All right. This is Michael Shevack for God Search. Keep on searching, uncover God, discover God, and recover an authentic, truth based view of God, truth based, religious inspired, if you like a religion, but keep it truth based and honest about the degree to which any idea or any opinion out there can be considered worshipable. So much so that you'd be willing to hurt each other slander each other, fight each other. Not necessary. It's not necessary. It will not create an experience called good. And that's what we want here on God Search. I'll see you next week. God bless you all. For those people who are celebrating the Day of Atonement out there, may you have an easy fast if you choose to fast. God bless.